Hello everybody, today I will be showing you how to write an argumentative essay. So what is an argumentative essay? So this is basically an essay that presents arguments about both sides of a certain issue. So you can either present both sides equally or one more than the other, but this solely depends on you. Or if this is assigned, it depends on what side you are assigned. The general format structure of an argumentative essay is a little bit different than just any regular essay. You will need an introduction, a body, but you also need a counterargument, which addresses an opposing side. We'll go more in depth with that component later on in the video. You will also need a conclusion, and the ideal amount of body paragraphs to support your point and your argument would be about 3. So here's an example essay prompt. The United States government has developed and implemented social welfare programs designed to aid its citizens in situations of need as a temporary safety net against poverty. However, many argue that it has become a crutch for many, resulting in people abusing these programs. Nevertheless, it is a service that many still do need. Much discourse in U.S. Congress has involved reducing or restricting funding for such services. In this discussion board, engaged in a debate on whether or not social welfare programs should be restricted or reduced in the CNMI. Construct an argumentative essay supporting your side on the issue. Consider the social implications. Be mindful that as social service provided by the U.S. government with local government cost sharing, this is paid out from taxpayers' dollars. So, let's go into writing the introduction. You will basically need about 3 things, but a lot of detail goes into each component. So an attention getter. This is basically a hook, something to entice the readers, something that makes them basically intrigued and wanting to read more. So this can be either a quote, a question, or a statistic. It can be a lot of other things too, but those are basically 3 things that it can be. You will also need sufficient background content, and what this means is that you need context and history that can be crucial in arguing your point, meaning you need a little bit of explanation as to your issue or as to your point, and your argument, in which will be stated in your thesis statement. So your thesis statement is basically a single sentence in which sums up the argument that you're trying to make. But in order to do that, you need some background so that your audience is familiar with, what you're talking about. So the original introduction. So this is before any revisions are made, so I will read this right now. Data gathered in a 2014 Consumer Expenditure Survey showed that there were 31.6 million families in the United States with at least one child under 18 years old. Slightly over 21.1% of these families received government means-tested assistance. This means that it is needed for families to be given this form of assistance as there's a form of demand. It is essential for social welfare programs to be maintained in order to ensure that people can meet their basic human needs. With that being said, the social welfare program should not be restricted or reduced in the CNMI, because doing so will only heighten the economic crisis the CNMI is currently in. In addition, the benefits of these programs are highly limited in the CNMI, and there are set requirements when applying for this assistance, meaning these programs are managed effectively. Alright, so let's go into the strengths and weaknesses of this paragraph. Basically, the only strength that I find here is the attention getter, because it shows a statistic, in which is right here, that's relevant to basically your point in argument. So that's fine, but there's a lot of weaknesses. So there's not enough background information to even, support your argument made in your thesis or your point. Because when you just state social welfare programs or basic human needs, it's something that the audience might not be familiar with, and so they might not be familiar with what you're trying to state in your thesis or the point you're trying to come across. So it is essential you provide sufficient explanation of these things. You also need a thesis that is concise and quick to the point, and with this whole portion is not concise enough. It's not quick to the point, so your audience can get lost while reading this and not be entirely sure on what you're trying to argue for or what is your point. So here is the revised paragraph. So as you can see, when you state things like Medicaid, food stamps, and housing assistance, that provide aid regarding food, housing, and healthcare, you're explaining the social welfare programs, what they do, and basic human needs. So you're explaining everything that the audience may be familiar with, but you're not entirely sure, so it's very important that we include this information anyways. And also, this is your thesis now. So it is a lot more concise, it is a lot more quick to the point, and it doesn't confuse the reader. So they're pretty much set on the point that you're trying to come across. So again, enough background information is now included, and your thesis is a lot more concise and quick to the point. Now, writing the body paragraph. So there is a lot of things involved in writing the body paragraph. You'll first need a topic sentence, and this ultimately should connect to your thesis statement. You'll also need supporting details, and this supports your topic sentence. So it explains it, and it makes certain connections so that the reader is pretty familiar with what you're trying to say. You will also need an example, and this example is very crucial because it validates your reasoning. It makes your point seem a lot more reliable because you have evidence to back yourself up. You also need to connect that to the topic sentence, because if your evidence doesn't relate to your topic sentence, then the paragraph is kind of useless because there's not a lot going on to kind of support your point. So you also need a concluding sentence, and this needs to be compelling, and it also needs to relate to the facts that are stated in the paragraph. Okay, so here is the original body paragraph. Firstly, the fundings allocated to these programs are limited, meaning it is already a challenge to get the needed assistance when in emergency economic situations. The social welfare programs in the CNMI are funded using block grants, which means there is limited funding availability that does not increase in response to economic changes. For instance, the rate of tourism has dropped immensely since the beginning of the year due to the cancellation of flights. Because of this cancellation, there is now a great decrease in individuals who spend money and pay taxes. Since there has been a drop in taxes, there has been a drop in certain individuals' incomes that are funded by the local government. With this happening, it is even more essential for certain people to be given welfare assistance as they have become prone for deep poverty. Unfortunately, additional funds cannot be allocated to these programs since they are funded using only block grants. It is essential to maintain these social welfare programs we have as of right now, because reducing the welfare programs will only cause for the economy to worsen in terms of self-sustainment, as limitations within these programs are more than evident. So let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses. So the strengths regarding this program is basically only the topic sentence because it relates to the thesis, but there's a lot of things missing. So the explanation and evidence within this program is not necessarily clear because you are stating a lot of how they just need, because in situations like this, they need welfare assistance. But your stance on this issue is not clear in its direction because you're basically stating, are you advocating for more funds to be allotted, or are you justifying why these funds need to be sustained? So it is important that the direction is clear so that your audience understands what you're trying to say. So with that not being clear, your supporting details don't connect, then your layout becomes confusing and the evidence ultimately doesn't relate, as said before. But there are things that you can do to improve this paragraph. You can be a lot more clear within your direction by making a little bit of emphasis on your stance, stating that because these are already limited regarding the funding, that this funding needs to be maintained, because when in emergency situations, it is essential that, or it is more prone for people to be in need of more things. So, as you state, stuff like it is needed, or that hence the repercussion is that the government is struggling to pay its employees who are now met with financial hardships. They will need assistance of social welfare programs for basic needs like food, housing, or healthcare. See, you're explaining it a lot more. And however, many of these federally funded welfare programs may not be adequately funded. So by stating this, you're not focused so much on the block grants that you state here. So the audience isn't confused that you're advocating for more funds, or so they're more familiar with the point you're trying to say, that because it's so limited, that restricting or reducing even more funds will be worse on people in economic situations, because this funding doesn't change with the it doesn't change with economic situations. So as you state all this evidence, your connection to the topic sentence becomes a lot more clear. And when you do that, everything connects with the thesis a lot more. So your audience is a lot more familiar with the points, with the examples. And then once all of this is more clear and more towards your point, then your conclusion becomes a lot more compelling because your audience is already understanding your point. So let's move on to writing the refutation, also known as, your counter argument paragraph. So you basically need a concession, a refuting argument, and a supporting, support. So your concession is basically when you acknowledge a point made by your opponent. Your refuting argument is basically you going against that opposing argument. So here's an example. Here's an original refutation without the revisions. It may be argued that with the current financial situation of the Sinai government, that these programs should be reduced as they only produce unmotivated students who are unwilling to work. However, these programs are funded by the federal government, so the financial situation of the Sinai government does not affect these programs in any way. Money has already been set aside and appropriated to these programs by the federal government. In addition, many individuals in the Sinai who apply for this aid are the ones who are greatly in need. It has already been mentioned that individuals in the Sinai make more money working for a minimum wage job than receiving assistance from the welfare programs offered. Most individuals who apply for this assistance are physically unable to work. They may be severely disabled or of old age, so finding a job that helps provide them with income does not become an option for them. This is exactly why social welfare funds should be maintained. In addition, cuts have already been made by reducing employer work hours in the Sinai. Due to this, it will become a lot harder to find jobs that pay workers using federal money. With this happening, many individuals affected by this may be at risk for great poverty. With the circumstances the Sinai government is in right now, it is even more necessary to provide these services as many poor people will be in need of them. So this is kind of all over the place. Your concession is clear, which is basically the imposing argument, which is right here. But what your refuting argument is all over the place because it is a lot of different things. So you need to be clear in stating how it does not produce unmotivated citizens who are unwilling to work. Because if you say that it is funded by the federal government and then usually people in need and then people who are unable to work, you need to focus on one thing. So here is the revised paragraph. So as you can see, we're focusing more on the argument saying that people who need this assistance are physically unable to work. So it doesn't produce unmotivated students who are unmotivated to work or unwilling because they are physically unable to. So once you do that and once you're more clear in your points, once you're more clear in your points, your argument is a lot more focused on what you're trying to come across. And so it's a lot more clear and focused. So writing the conclusion. You need to restate your thesis, you need to summarize your main points which are included in your body paragraph, and you need to have a call to action. So here's an original conclusion. You can stop the video and read this right here. But here are some strengths and weaknesses. So it makes a connection to the thesis, and there's a call to action. But however, when you're summarizing the main points in here, it is only focused on the economic situation in the Sinai. So you need to be a lot more clear and a lot more broad of how this relates to the entire points come across in your original paragraph. So in this revised conclusion, when you are stating individuals in financial circumstances, it basically makes a more clear relation to the entire essay. So it connects to all paragraphs and makes a more clear relation to the theses. The support is more smooth and organized. And once that is done, the call to action seems a lot more compelling. And what a call to action basically is when you want your audience to agree with your point. And so they do. Because once you include support that is a lot more related to your entire essay, they will understand and most likely agree with your point. So that's all for today. Hope you have good luck in writing your argumentative essay, and I hope this helped.